Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're heading, figuratively speaking, to the Maldives. Think paradise, right? Turquoise waters, white sands. But there's a much deeper story there. It's woven right into the DNA of the Maldivian people. So our big question for this deep dive, is there one Maldives gene? Well, the short answer is kind of no, but the long answer, that's where it gets really fascinating. We're looking at this incredible mix, ancient roots, island isolation, and a really compelling national health story. It makes the Maldives one of the most studied island populations in the Indian Ocean.
Exactly. And island populations, they're often like natural genetic laboratories. They can tell us so much. For the Maldives, it's this unique combination. Clear South Asian origins, yes, but also some subtle West Asian input, and then the effects of isolation, what we call founder effects. It's a complex mix.
Okay, so let's start unpacking that story. The origins. How did researchers even begin to map this out? What tools did they use?
Right. Well, the key study we're drawing on looked at 141 people from 6 major settlements across the Maldives. And they didn't just look at one thing. They analyzed autosomal DNA that gives you the whole ancestry picture, both sides. Then mitochondrial DNA, the mtDNA, which you only got from your mother.
The maternal line.
Exactly. And Y-chromosome DNA, which is passed only from father to son.
The paternal line. So you get both sides covered separately plus the overall mix.
Precisely. It gives you a really detailed picture of who came from where and sort of how.
So they gather all this data. What's the first big takeaway? What's the main signal that comes through about where Maldivians primarily came from?
The main signal was, well, crystal clear. South Asia, the maternal lines, the mtDNA, mostly these big groups, these clades called M, R, and U. These are classic South Asian genetic markers. Think of them like ancient genetic surnames.
Okay, so the maternal side points strongly to the Indian subcontinent. What about the paternal side, the Y DNA?
A very similar story, actually. The dominant paternal groups, or haplogroups, were H1, J2, L, R1A on A, and R2. Again, these are very characteristic of South Asian populations. So the foundation, the vast majority of the ancestry, it's clearly rooted in the Indian subcontinent.
Right, which makes sense geographically. But you mentioned a complex mix. Was there a twist, something unexpected in that genetic data?
Yes. This is where it gets particularly interesting. While the big picture is South Asian, they found this subtle but definite thread of West Asian ancestry.
West Asian, like from the Middle East or Persia?
Potentially, yes. But here's the crucial part. This West Asian signal was found almost exclusively on the male line, the Y chromosomes.
So male lines from the West, but not really female lines.
Exactly. There was very little West Asian mtDNA found.
Yeah.
So what this suggests isn't, large families migrating from the West. It points more towards male-mediated gene flow.
Male-mediated, meaning like sailors, traders,
Yeah.
people moving along those Indian Ocean routes.
Precisely. That's the most likely scenario. Over centuries, men involved in seafaring, trade, perhaps religious movements, arrived and integrated into the Maldivian population, contributing their paternal genes.
Okay, that paints a much more nuanced picture than just South Asian.
Yeah.
But still, for a nation right on those ancient sea lanes, was there anything missing that surprised you?
Yes, definitely. And this was really counterintuitive. Given the Maldives location, you might expect some genetic ties to Southeast Asia.
Yeah, you'd think so. It's not that far across the ocean.
But the data showed basically no substantial Southeast Asian gene flow. It really drives home the point that being on a trade route doesn't automatically mean widespread genetic mixing.
Wow. Okay, so geography isn't destiny when it comes to genes, necessarily.
Not always, no. It depends who is traveling, who is settling, the social dynamics, lots of factors.
And this connects to language, too, doesn't it? The DV language has Indo-Aryan roots from the subcontinent.
It lines up perfectly.
Yeah.
The language and the primary genetics tell a very consistent story pointing towards South Asia.
So how does this more subtle male West Asian link fit into how Maldivians might see their own heritage? Does it cause any, discussion?
It certainly adds complexity to discussions about identity. Historically, there's often emphasis placed on links to Arab or Persian traders, perhaps connected to the introduction of Islam. The genetics supports a connection, particularly through those male lines, but confirms the foundation is overwhelmingly South Asian. So the challenge is acknowledging all threads of the heritage accurately, giving each its proper weight without overstating or understating.
Right, getting that balance in the national story. Okay, so that's the big picture of origins. But what about within the Maldives? Are the islands all the same genetically, or are there differences between the atolls?
Oh, there are definitely differences. The study found clear genetic substructure within the archipelago.
Meaning islands or groups of islands have slightly different genetic profiles.
Exactly. And this brings us to something really key for understanding island genetics.
Hmm.
Founder effects.
Founder effects. Okay, break that down for us. What does that mean in simple terms?
Imagine just a few families setting off in boats and founding a new settlement on a previously uninhabited island. They only bring a small slice of the genetic diversity from their original larger population.
Okay, like a small sample.
Right. And whatever genetic quirks or rare variants those founders happen to carry, well, those traits can become much more common in the new island population over generations, just because they started out with that specific small group.
So chance variations in the founding group get amplified just because the population is small and isolated.
Precisely. It's like starting a new collection with only a handful of marbles. The colors in your small collection might be very different in proportion to the giant bag you took them from.
That makes sense.
Hmm.
But does human behavior, like social rules, play a part too? You mentioned culture earlier.
Absolutely. This is where it gets really fascinating, the interplay of genes and culture. The study pointed to practices like matrilocality.
Matrilocality.
Yeah.
That's when the husband moves to live with the wife's family, right?
Yes, so if women tend to stay in their home village or island generation after generation, their maternal DNA lines, their mtDNA, tend to stay put, becoming very localized.
Ah, I see. So you might find specific mtDNA types concentrated on particular islands?
Exactly. Meanwhile, men might move between islands for marriage, spreading their Y-DNA, their paternal lines, more widely, and also practices like endogamy, marrying within your own community or island, that also limits gene flow and keeps populations distinct.
So these rules about marriage and residence literally sculpt the genetic landscape over time.
They do. They can make rare variants more common in one place or protect certain lineages. It's a clear fingerprint of culture left in the genes.
Wow. So when we see these distinct island identities, is it more down to these traditions or just the fact that the islands are far apart, or both?
It's almost always both, interacting in complex ways. Geography matters, of course, distance, how easy it is to travel by boat. But the cultural rules strongly influence who moves and who marries whom. They found evidence for independent male founder effects, too, suggesting different groups of men might have settled different atolls initially. So it's this mix of geography, founding events, and social structures that creates the unique genetic diversity across the Maldives.
Okay, this is incredibly insightful. Now let's shift gears a bit to something with very direct modern-day impact. Health. You mentioned the Maldives has one of the highest rates of beta-thalassemia carriers in the world. Can you give us the numbers on that? It sounds serious.
It is very significant from a public health perspective. Government figures and studies consistently place the carrier rate for beta-thalassemia at around 16% of the population. 16%.
16? That's
Yeah.
huge. 1 in 6 people, roughly?
Approximately, yes. And think about what that means for families. About 1 in every 30 marriages is statistically likely to be between two carriers.
And if both parents are carriers,
Then there's a 1 in 4 chance with each pregnancy that the child will inherit the condition, beta-thalassemia major, which is a severe genetic blood disorder. National data suggests around 28 new cases of severe thalassemia are diagnosed each year. For a country the size of the Maldives, that's a substantial number.
can you explain briefly what β-thalassemia is for listeners who might not know?
Sure, it's an inherited condition that affects hemoglobin production. Hemoglobin is the protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen around your body. People with beta-thalassemia major don't produce enough functional hemoglobin, leading to severe anemia. They often need regular blood transfusions, lifelong medical care. It's a very challenging condition.
So why? Why is the carrier rate so incredibly high in the Maldives? Is it just bad luck?
No, it's not just chance. It's actually rooted in evolutionary history. Like many areas around the Indian Ocean, the Maldives historically had high rates of malaria. Malaria puts enormous pressure on human populations. And it turns out that carrying one copy of the thalassemia gene, being a carrier, actually offers some protection against severe malaria, especially in childhood.
Ah, the heterozygote advantage. So carriers were more likely to survive malaria.
Exactly, they had a survival edge. So the gene, despite causing disease in double dose, was actually beneficial in single dose in that environment it was selected for.
Okay, so malaria provides the initial advantage for the carrier state. But how did it get to 16%? That still seems really high.
That's where the island factors come back in. You take that selective pressure from malaria
Yeah.
and you combine it with genetic drift, those random changes in gene frequency that happen much faster in small, isolated populations.
Right. The random fluctuations have a bigger impact.
And add in the founder effects we talked about. If some of the initial settlers happen to be carriers, that trait could quickly become much more common in the island population. So, what started as an ancient adaptation for survival has, over time, concentrated this gene to a level where it now represents a major public health challenge.
It's a trade-off, essentially.
Yes.
Past protection leading to a present-day burden.
A classic example of that. And it means the Maldives has had to develop extensive screening programs, genetic counseling, treatment facilities. The
Wow.
World Health Organization has clearly recognized it as a significant health issue for the nation.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together. If you had to summarize the core genetic story of the Maldives based on this research, what would it be?
I'd say it's a story of strong South Asian foundations, clearly visible on both maternal and paternal sides. Then you have this layer of West Asian influence, mostly coming through the male lines, likely linked to ancient maritime trade. And surprisingly, very little from Southeast Asia, despite the location. Then, within the islands, you see the clear marks of founder effects and cultural practices like matrilocality, shaping distinct local genetic patterns. And overlying all of this is the significant legacy of evolutionary adaptation in the form of a high thalassemia rate.
That's a great summary. Now, this kind of detailed genetic insight, it never stays just in the lab, does it? It raises real-world questions, even controversies.
Inevitably, science often intersects with identity, policy, and ethics.
Let's touch on a few. First, that origins and identity point.
Yeah.
If the genetic says mostly South Asian with a specific kind of West Asian link, how does that mesh with national stories that might emphasize, say, Arab or Persian heritage more broadly? Is there a tension there?
There can be, yes. It's about integrating scientific findings with deeply held cultural narratives and historical traditions. Genetics provides one type of evidence, history and culture provide others. The key is finding a narrative that respects both acknowledging the documented genetic patterns while also honoring the historical connections and cultural identity that people feel strongly about. It's not about genetics replacing identity, but enriching the understanding of it. It requires careful, nuanced discussion.
Finding that balance. Okay, second point, thalassemia screening. It's free, but you said uptake is uneven. This leads to a tough ethical debate. Should screening, maybe before marriage or in school, be opt-out rather than opt-in to catch more carriers and reduce severe cases?
That's a really difficult one. From a purely public health math perspective, making screening routine or opt-out could dramatically lower the number of babies born with severe thalassemia, given that 1 in 30 marriage statistic. It would allow for informed reproductive choices.
But the downside?
The potential for stigma is huge. People might feel labeled, pressured, or discriminated against based on their carrier status. There's also the risk of eroding trust in the health system if screening feels coercive rather than supportive. It's a profound ethical balancing act between population health goals and individual autonomy and rights.
Yeah, no easy answers there at all. And a third point, the Maldives image. It's marketed globally as this perfect, pristine paradise. Is there a place or even a need to talk more openly internationally about a major public health issue like thalassemia, or does that conflict with the tourism brand?
That's the branding versus reality question. The Health Ministry and WHO are already quite open about thalassemia in their reports and planning, because it's crucial for health policy and potential international collaboration or aid. Whether that becomes part of the tourism narrative is different. There can be a reluctance to highlight domestic challenges when selling an idyllic image. But transparency can also build trust and sometimes even lead to unexpected support or research interest. Ultimately, the priority has to be the health and well-being of the population.
These discussions really show how genetics bumps up against society, culture, ethics.
Absolutely. Genetic information is powerful, but it always lands in a complex human context. Understanding the science, like we've tried to explore today, is just the first step. The conversations that follow are just as important.
Well, we're nearing the end of our deep dive. And I think it's safe to say the idea of a single Maldives gene just doesn't capture the reality, does it? What we have instead is this incredibly rich, layered Maldivian genetic story. It's got these deep South Asian roots, yes, but also those intriguing threads from the West carried on the sea winds, mostly by men. It's shaped by how people lived on the islands, who married whom, where they stayed, matrilocality leaving its mark. And woven through it all is this major health story of thalassemia, an ancient adaptation turned into a modern challenge. It really underscores how place, history, and even disease shape who we are genetically. It's not about purity, it's about the mix. And why numbers like 16% carrier rate or 1 in 30 marriages aren't just statistics, they represent real lives, real families, and ongoing public health efforts in the Maldives today.
Exactly. And maybe a final thought to leave you with is this. When we understand the complex genetic tapestry of a place like the Maldives, how does that challenge our own, perhaps simpler, ideas about what national identity means? What does it tell us about the interplay between genes, history, culture, and our shared responsibilities for health in a world that's both beautifully diverse and increasingly connected? And perhaps what hidden stories might lie within our own genetic makeup, just waiting for us to look.